Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to Song of the Answerer. Now, the reading of Leaves of Grass, if you just sit down with the deathbed edition, you just start reading it all the way through. By the time you get to Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, you have pretty much moved through 1/3 of Leaves of Grass. And I have students who often stay with me right up to the end of Ferry, and then they kind of feel like, well, you know, it's kind of, I've worked through the important poems. I mean, I've worked through Song of Myself, worked through Song of the Open Road, and so now I'm kind of, I mean, how much better can this project get? And I often will say, oh no, no. I mean, people who do not respect what is now coming through the end of Leaves of Grass, they will often say, you know what, it's done. I mean, he's done his stuff. No, I'm going to challenge you guys, though, to say there's more great stuff coming, and we're going to see it now with Song of the Answerer, a classic example of what I mean. It's a poem that not too many people, I mean, you start talking about Walt Whitman, they'll usually mention Lilacs, they'll mention Song of Myself, they'll talk about Song of the Open Road. Rarely do you hear people celebrate a poem like Song of the Answerer until you study it, and then you're like, whoa, why don't more people talk about this poem? It's quite an amazing text. Now, there are some assumptions, because this is just an introductory set of comments for Song of the Answer. There are some assumptions that we just want to review. First of all, our first assumption is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, the playlist is called Talks with Walt, and we hope that you've been working with everything, beginning with those opening lines. The very first word of the deathbed edition is the word come, and an invitation, and the first word of Song of the Answer is the word now. He loves that intimacy that he'll always be working with, as we said in earlier lectures. And we hope that you've worked with us all the way up through it, including all of the sections of Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Now, I just want to remind us, we are together challenging ourselves to engage in learning. We define learning as that desire to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We've often said it that the new is the new, the N-E-W is the K-N-E-W. Everything has this tendency to come back, and yet, as we're going to hear in this poem about the great poet, the great artist. What is the great poet and the great artist? Well, it's that individual who is always reminding us that it is true that the new is the new. The N-E-W is the K-N-E-W, and we're always connecting everything in some creative ways. Now, of course, our annotative approach that we'll assume that you know as well is we're always working with every text at 3 levels. We got 2 sections of Song of the Answer. We'll work with each one of the 2 separately, and we're always asking about our reading level. We're working at level 1, summary, no doubt. What does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? Here we're going to divide it up at 2A, themes, messages, and 2B, rhetoric. Not what Whitman says, but how Whitman says it. For example, the word answer is going to be capitalized 5 times in this poem. We're going to be interested as to ask why. Like, why does he play that game? What's going on there? And then finally, level 3 will ask, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? At 3A, how do I relate to other texts? We'll obviously begin with Leaves of Grass first, but not just Leaves of Grass. We'll ask about a whole bunch of other texts that we study together in 303. Of course, texts here can mean things that you watch, things you listen to, obviously, things you play for the gamers in the house. And then finally at 3B, and most importantly, because our learning theory is to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways, we'll ask, how can I relate to this information personally? And how can I understand it in some new way, some provocative way? To try and own it is our language that we'll often use. Now, we also assume that you're familiar with what we call in 303 our Big 5. About any given text we study, we always ask about 5 key elements. What does this text have to say about epistemology, what you can know? Again, to say, I know everything, or I know about this absolutely and you don't. We'll call that the absolutist epistemological position for knowledge, but that's a dangerous position to take because all kinds of craziness happens when people are absolutely certain. Of course, the opposite of that is to be a relativist. There is no truth, there are no absolutes, which seems to posit an absolute or a truth, and that is what we call the performative contradiction, sitting somewhere in the middle. And this is, of course, Whitman's injunction to us in Leaves of Grass, is the epistemological position that we call in 303 of fallibilism. I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. And about that, I could be wrong, that is a fundamental epistemological exhortation, we would argue, for Whitman in Leaves of Grass. Our second of our big five is to ask not only about epistemology, but ontology. That is to say, who are you? Who am I? Fundamental to our notion of being. That's going to be a significant one. And then our 3 and 4 of our big five are psychology, the study of the individual mind, sociology, the study of the collective mind. What are the motivations? What are the reasons for behavior and action? And obviously for us with our study of Leaves of Grass, we've seen a whole lot of this dance. We're going to hear about this notion of dancing all the way through Leaves of Grass. This dance is going to be a romanza, the Italian word for a ballad or a dance or a poem, right? A ditty, we might even say. That dance is always happening between the psychological and the sociological. And then finally, and many of you have argued that now that you're through Brooklyn Ferry, you see it, that really Leaves of Grass is a theodicy, the last of our big five. The question, of course, of why must there be pain and suffering in the world? Can you explain it? Why must bad things happen? And can there be any value to it? We have said that Whitman suggests time and again. We think, of course, of the greatest example of this in Song of Myself, passage 46-47. Time and again, Whitman has made this argument. When bad things happen, we have to stop asking, why did this happen to me? And learn, that's the key word, right? Learn how to ask, why did this happen for me? To turn that 2 to a 4 allows us to no longer be a victim, but rather to be an individual who is able to take control of his or her or their world. Finally, the 5 P's, as we call them in our study of Whitman in particular here, we're talking about the 5 perspectives on Whitman. We want to see that there's not a Walt Whitman. There are multiple Whitmans, and we're going to try to obviously treasure and celebrate each of them in turn. We, of course, see Whitman as a person, no question. That's a first of our P's. The second is Whitman as poet. That will be significant to our study in Song of the Answer, because the answer is, in fact, the poet, as opposed to, for example, the singer, that we might see as maybe lesser than in terms of Whitman's view. Well, obviously I have to get into it. Whitman started out as a teacher, so our third P is Whitman as pedagogue, instructor. And I've made the argument in earlier lectures that, and I think it's true, that Whitman his whole life saw himself as first and foremost a teacher, an educator, somebody to share new ideas with, and he'll definitely define the poet that way often. Our fourth of the P's is obviously Whitman as politician, especially his celebration of democracy. We're going to come back to these notions of his egalitarianism here in Song of the Answer. And finally, and man, we cannot overlook this one, Whitman was a voracious reader. He was self-taught. He is, of course, a philosopher, so that's the last of our P's as well. And we'll see him, everything from Socrates to Emerson, a contemporary, of course, and very, very much an influencer of Whitman's philosophic thought. And we're going to see some of that philosophy as well introduced here. For example, in the inscriptions section, we had a poem called Eidolons, and we're going to come back to some of those ideas in Eidolons here, and you'll begin to see that Whitman was intentionally kind of setting up ideas as he created Leaves of Grass. Now, as we have said, the best approach, and I'm going to suggest this again with Song of the Answerer, the best approach is you read the poem on your own, getting your own copy, annotating it heavily, and then coming back to my lecture. I know a number of you have told me that you actually haven't followed us since the very beginning with inscriptions, and what you did is you picked up one of these lectures and you went, wow, now that's interesting, and he keeps making these references to earlier. I'm going to go ahead and get my own copy of Leaves of Grass. I'm going to actually sit down and not just read it, but read it. That is to say, annotate it. So I'm going to challenge you to play that game as well. Now, because this is an introductory set of comments, let's go to our Nortons really quickly, and let's hear what Nortons has to tell us about Song of the Answerer, because the compilation of this poem is actually in itself quite a fascinating study. Nortons reads, for the 1881 edition, this poem was created from what had been 2 separate poems. The first section having originally been one of the 12 untitled poems of the first edition, becoming Poem of the Poet in the second edition, Leaves of Grass number 3 in the third, and in the fourth, now listen to my morning romanza from the opening lines, right? A title taken from the then added 2-line opening passage and remained until the second section and present title were added in 1881. So if you're wanting to write down anything of what we're sharing here, 1881 is your working date. The second section began in 1856 as Poem of the Singers and the Words of the Poems, quote unquote. And it became Leaves of Grass number 6 in the third edition, and the indications in the fourth, fifth, and sixth editions until in 1881 it took its present position. The joining of the 2 poems is obviously appropriate, for the poet of the second section is the answer of the first. And in fact, The two were consecutive in the editions of 1871 and 1876. As it now stands, the composition is the result of not a little revision. From the first section, the last 4 lines were dropped in 1867, and some lines of the second section were adapted from the 1855 preface. So in some ways, you could argue that this poem is a bringing together, which is going to be important because he's going to argue that the answer, or the greatest artists or poets, are great synthesizers. They're great integrators. And this is why for us the integral philosophy is such an important part of our approach to study in 303. We will think about what it is in this poem that, and it does celebrate the poet, right? The poet versus the singer. What it is that makes great artists, great poets. And of course here, we're back to our conversations at learnstrong.net about Keats, for example, an ode on a Grecian urn. And of course that list could go on and on and on. You'll remember in our opening comments on Milton, as we've given full lectures on everything, every book of Paradise Lost, you'll remember that we said about Milton that one of the things that makes Milton so powerful, as we've said about Shakespeare and Dante and Chaucer and other great thinkers, is that they have this ability to do what we'll hear in this poem, transmute. That is to say, somehow extract will be the other word that gets used here, or the joiner phenomenon. In other words, what is it that great artists do? Well, they reach back. Right? This is why we say the new is the new. They reach back to everything that's come before, and they somehow are able to grab all of that and synthesize and understand it in a new and provocative way, establishing some kind of influence for a future that is coming. Whitman is a classic example of the answer that he's singing about here in this poem. Whitman was not very well understood in his own day and time. We talked about, of course, this earlier in lectures elsewhere. And yet, later, we look back and we say, well, wow, if America has an epic, it's got to be Leaves of Grass. And if America has a Homer, it's got to be Whitman. And what is it that makes Whitman so remarkable? Well, he's this transmuter. He is this synthesizer. He is this integrative thinker that brings all of this old stuff, brings it to his present day, and then has tremendous influence into the future. All of our great thinkers, all of our great writers, all of our great artists have always had this capacity, this ability, right? And to that degree, we're going to as well pay attention to the way in which in this poem we're going to have lots and lots of Christian and biblical overtones. We're going to, again, back to Whitman's attempt to create the new American Bible, as we said in earlier lectures. The book of Psalms, we said, is kind of where we are now with all of these songs, Song of the Answer being one of them. Now, again, we're going to work with section 1 as an entity, and then section 2, and then finally at the end of our comments in section 2 we'll try and bring it all back together the way we have done in all of our earlier lectures. I hope that you will enjoy coming along with us with Song of the Answer, and you will yourselves be challenged. Thank you.